And in that time, it's become pretty obvious to me there's some critical issues in relation to building and pest issues for purchasers of properties to become aware of, that if they aren't aware of, are going to cause a potential financial loss and buy the wrong property. The first one is quite astounding to me, really. I still can't get my head around it, but it's the manner in which a property is marketed to the public that's not right. What I mean by that is if Joe Bloggs is looking at realestate.com or Real Domain and they see a 4-bedroom, 2-bathroom property, the reality is if they do a formal search on the council records, they might find out that that property is actually incomplete building work or informal building work or has had an approval that has not yet finished. So 50% of the inspections I do reflect that that is the case, that they are not what they are advertised on the internet. So that's quite astounding. So the reason for that is what happens when you build a property, either new building, residential property I'm talking about here, or commercial as well. You must, under the law, the Building Act, put in a building application and get an approval and go through a process of inspections, and it's got to culminate with the final inspection certificate. And if it doesn't, then it remains incomplete and the product has not been finished. That's under the Building Act. So brand new buildings are often not complete because they don't get a final inspection certificate, or an existing structure might have an addition, the 3-bed 1-bath taken to 5-bed 3-bath. But if it doesn't have the final inspection or get an approval, that work is not going to be registered on council despite the manner in which it's advertised. So, how do you make sure as a purchaser, you're going to get the right product you're buying? And I was talking to Mark about this before. The only way to do it is to do a formal search with the relevant council authority that the property is located in. Do not act on the marketing, according to what I see, of the internet, because it could be fatal. Next one. So don't act on the marketing, don't believe what you see on the internet. The consequences for buying houses with incomplete or informal building work can be fatal. So if you buy a house and it hasn't got a final inspection certificate, if you have a fire, you might not have any insurance, you'll get a rejection of your insurance claim. You inherit the reselling of the property down in the future when you come to sell. You've got to try and pass that property on. And the last thing is, there's no guarantee of ever getting a final inspection certificate for that work, so you might buy a property that you can't actually get completed final inspection. Number 2, again, different service levels offered by different companies. So if you're buying a property, what I'd recommend to your clients is make sure they find out what their service provider, their building and pest provider, is going to provide in terms of the amount of information in the service. The greater majority will only adhere to the Australian standards, which is a minimum guideline, and it excludes a lot of things. And again, what Mark touched on before, if you engage a company that does not give you all the information you need and exceed the standards, you could be one of those people that buys a property that the building and pest person doesn't point out that there could be some extensions and changes to that property, and if he doesn't put that in his report, then legally Mark wouldn't be able to act on that and get you out of that contract. So if you get a company that only gives you the minimum, you might not get comments on plumbing, electrical, there's no comments on any of your electrical appliances, that sort of stuff. So make sure you know what service level you're getting. Next one, and the next one is the type of reporting you get. Again, the majority or the norm seems to be a tick and flick or a ticks and crosses and boxes. That's pretty minimalistic, and what you really want is a comprehensively written explanatory report identifying not only the problems, defects, but probable cause and rectification. So there's 2 big things there, the type of information, the quality of information, and the reporting style you get. The third one that I've identified is, this is a common practice at the moment for vendors that are providing reports to potential purchasers of their property, and invariably it's going to be of the nature of the most minimalistic or basic. So just remember that if you're a purchaser, it'll only adhere to the minimum standards. Next one, please, sorry. And Mark will probably be able to testify this. If you act on a report that vendor gives you, if you're a purchaser, building and pest reports, and you don't get the liability transferred to you, you could leave yourself open as well. So the transfer of liability position. So lastly, always get legal advice if you're going to be acting on vendor-provided building and pest reports. Number 4, understand the contract and what searches will be done for you. Time and time again, the first thing is who designs the contract that most people use for the purchase and sale of a property? The REIQ, and the REIQ is the governing body for the Real Estate Institute of Queensland, so therefore there is, in my opinion, it's quite biased, there's many unfavourable clauses in the contract, one of which is in the building and pest, the vendor is entitled to a copy of the entire reports if an issue is raised by a purchaser, and the second is the terminology that a purchaser is to act reasonably on their findings. So if they're not satisfied, as the term satisfied, they can pull out, but they have to be reasonable. Well, if a purchaser wants to pull out of a building and pest on an issue that they think they're not satisfied with and they're acting reasonably, under the current terms of the contract, the vendor could say, no, I'm going to hold you to the contract because I don't think you're acting reasonably. So what Mark said before is really pertinent. Go and get advice before you make an offer on a contract, because it comes from the REOQ. There's a lot of unfavourable clauses in there just in relation to building and pest and other areas, and get it amended so it suits your best interests. And that's just 2 examples from building and pest. Last thing is, this is very important, and I touched on it in the third number 1, is over 50% of properties on the internet are wrong based on what we see from our inspections, not marketed factually. Make sure the conveyancer, and it's not part of their process generally, you have to instruct them to do a search, but make sure they do a search with the council to validate what you're purchasing. So if it says 4-bed, 2-bath on the internet, the only way you'll know what it is officially is go to the council records and do a search, and they will tell you, okay? So before you buy any property, make sure you're doing that search, and do it before you put an offer in, to know that you're buying what was advertised. Number 5, and we'll skip that one, that's okay. Number 5 is an important one as well, time allocation for building and pest. There's a common practice when contracts are signed, often on the same day as you've gone into an open house for an agent to put a contract in front of you. You're stressed, you're rushed and whatnot, and there's an intent to put a 7-day clause in there for the building and pest time frame. 7 days will include weekends. It's not, you have to stipulate working days. So I would suggest that, next one please, sorry. Instead of accepting the 7 days, when the agent will invariably try and put that 7 days there, is to get more, because you won't have enough time to get your inspections done, include your Saturday, Sunday, get the reports back, act on the information, and be comfortable to proceed with it. So get more than 7 days, try and get 14 days. Most of the time the finance is 14 days. You don't need to use the 14 days, but try and get as much as you can for that reason. So don't get manipulated at the time of contract filling with 7 days, because you don't often have enough time. And the other option is, if you're in a situation as a purchaser, there is an option to get an extension of time. Most people that I deal with purchasers are rushed. They can make decisions based on duress, thinking that they're running out of time on the day of their building and pest expiry, but there is an option to get an extension of time, but you have to go through legal options with that. Yep. And so, yeah, never make your decisions based on running out of time and duress, because it is a common tactic I see with my clients, getting pushed for time because they get a minimal amount of time at the time. It is your offer. You can stipulate what amount of time you want for the building and pest, but I find 7 days isn't enough. Okay, number 6, never ever make decisions based on verbal information. And I guess, yeah, the best way to put this is, I find when I do my job, there's a lot of verbal information proffered by vendors and agents in relation to building and pest that just aren't factually true. And an example of this is when I go and do a job and I see there's been some building work done on a property, that is an extension and it requires formal approval, extensions and final inspection certificate. The property might have been originally 3-bed, 1-bath. When I turn up, I see 5-bed, 3-bath, and it's marketed along the lines of that the extensions are all okay. So I go to the agent and I'll ask for that documentation to show me where's the final inspection certificate to say that it's okay because everything's all right, and it's not available. Okay, so that's just an example of how a verbal claim can be made, but you only know if it's true if it's substantiated in writing with your building and pest. So always never act on anything of a verbal nature, because I find with my experiences it's often some distance from the truth when it's tested. Okay, and 7, the last one, this is just as important as well. There's more protection in Queensland for buyers of a motor vehicle than buyers of a house. What I mean by that is, if I wanted to sell any one of you my car, I have to go and get a roadworthy certificate, validate the product, its condition, its nature, and so therefore you've got some sort of a safeguard legally. With a house, yeah, next one, sorry, there's no such protection, and we have more of a culture of buyer beware. There's no requirement for a seller of a property to go, this is the condition of my house, or get a building and pest, or get a test on it, or anything like that, okay? So there's no obligation also for any owners to disclose to you any issues they might know of, right? Yep. And so what I would suggest you do is, as part of your purchase considerations, if you're a purchaser, because it won't be proffered to you by the vendors. In fact, most of the time when we find defects, we go and find out that there's been an effort by the vendor to adversely conceal them or hide them, because when we ask the vendor about it, they know about it, they tell us all about it. So the only way you can get close to getting any known defect disclosed to you is if you ask for a formal request of the vendor to disclose any past, current or future issues, it's got to be in writing. Examples can be sewer drainage, legal disputes, termite history, building improvement certification, that kind of thing. This is very important because it won't be profit, you believe me, and you've got to give yourself every opportunity to get the best information about a property before you enter into contract, because it won't be forthcoming. Including all the documentation, surveys, building plans, that they often get missed. They should be passed over as part of the process, but they often get missed. So that's the 7 issues that I've found in the last 20 years that come up for purchasers to be aware of. The main ones being validate your product, because unfortunately a lot of them are not truthfully marketed and they're not what's on council records. And just exercise caution, I guess, and yeah, but you're welcome to contact me and I'll give you a list of these. So you have these if you're looking at purchasing or for any of your clients in the future. They're also on our website as well. But any questions on that?
Do you, oh sorry, no, go ahead. You're right.
You know?
No, I was just going to say, do you service a lot of house and land packages? Do you get involved with that side of things?
I'm only licensed to completed residential buildings, so
okay.
when it's finished, I do brand new buildings that are finished, right?
Yeah.
But like I say to you, most of the time, I'm finding 50% of the time, they haven't got their final inspection certificate, so
Yeah.
it's not a completed building. So I do brand new buildings, but people wanting to do the due diligence. Some people choose not to do that. I would
Right.
suggest they do because of the amount of defects I find with brand new buildings.
Yeah,
It's
yeah.
quite astonishing. In fact, most of the problems I have are on newer houses versus
Yeah.
the older houses. The older houses, they're decades old.
Yeah.
Prove the test of time. They might have
Yeah.
some old materials, but they're there. But the newer places with the materials we use now that are laminate, inferior, very problematic. So
Yeah.
I find a lot more for newer. So I do newer houses, yes.
Okay, cool. Righto.
Did you want?
You covered quite a bit. I want to know how you take care of the old houses. How you take care of the old houses if I buy a second property?
Like an old, same way as you do a new house. You just go through a process. You do every single bit of the outside, the inside, the exterior. You don't treat an older house any different to a newer house. You go and look at the property and you comment on what a building and pest is about. Is identification of defects, major or minor, and termite, timber pest identification. But a good building and pest person won't stop there. They'll talk about other things. Really, what I try and do is impart any information I know about a property, regardless of whether or not I'm licensed, not like plumbing, electrical, building certification, to someone that's looking at buying, because what does that do? That says that you get the right information to make the best decision, and it minimises any risk on me. So, but I don't treat any older houses any different to newer houses in terms of mindset, or you still look at the whole block, exterior, interior, anything that's there, if that makes sense.
Do you cover any kind of testing as well?
Any kind of?
P-labs or
I don't do any scientific testing materials.
Yeah.
No, like for asbestos and things like that. No.
Yeah, because the more common problem I see with old houses is
Lead paint and that.
yeah, they used it as a P-lab, or you never know.
It's a visual, non-invasive inspection legally, but when I go and see an older house, if I think there might be lead paint or the product asbestos, of course I comment on it, but that you then need to refer to a scientific test. I don't do any of that scientific testing, but it's my duty of care to point out that, hey, there could be lead paint here, there could be asbestos here, but unless you conclusively test it, but no, I don't, so that should be commented on. A minimalistic one, only that adheres to the standard, won't do that. That's what I'm saying. The key point is if you get a company that just gives you the basic, legally, if they don't comment on a building issue, like you might be buying a property, will not be told about some extensions that are done, and you can't get out of the contract legally because the inspector hasn't talked about it. So really you need all the information to make an informed decision, not to scare you, but to educate you. So, but at the moment, you're not getting that. You're getting 50% of the properties on the internet are falsely marketed, and that's what you got to do is validate what you're buying first of all. So, does that make sense?
Yeah, but I have a question. Because some of the LIM reports covers what you talk about. If you look at the council's LIM report, plan and information, any sewage-based components should cover that. And as well as the lawyer, you will also look into.
No, they don't.
When
Not
I
always.
go for it, we'll make sure at least the title and the
Not
land or etc.
not the characteristics of the property and not building certification. I deal with people all the day that are buying houses and have bought houses that don't know they've got unapproved building work. I deal with people after 3 years, like they build a house, and then I do a job for someone 3 years later who's buying that house. The original people who got all of that done at the time don't have any clue that they've lived in a house for 3 years that's incomplete. Block of land on council records. I tell my people to do a search, and they do the correct search, which tells them that. But it's not always done. You have to instruct the solicitor to do that specific search to tell you what characteristics of the house are. They'll do the searches for easements and things like that, but not, is this a 4-bed, 2-bathroom house, building characteristics nature? And that's the danger. Does that make sense? Yeah. And that's where the important part is, because it'll be marketed like 4-bed, 2-bath, and you want to make sure you're getting a 4-bed, 2-bath. But unfortunately, 50% of the time, my people that I deal with over 20 years are not. Okay? Okay, thank you.
Thank you.